Hello, thank you so much for joining today. Today we're visiting with Rebecca Kauma from the city of Long Beach, who's going to talk about some of the work that they've done with digital equity and collecting data about the local landscape and access to the internet in the city. So first, could we start off by talking about what brought Long Beach's attention to gaps in information about internet adoption and how the idea developed?
Sure, absolutely. And greetings from Long Beach, everyone. I'm super excited to share with you what we've learned throughout this process. So for us, we have been trying to understand the digital divide for quite some time now. And this officially started back when we were developing our blueprint for economic development back in 2017. So our blueprint for economic development is our strategic plan around economic development to help advance the work of entrepreneurs, workers, and just people that live in the city of Long Beach. And so one of the key focus areas of that blueprint was economic inclusion and then addressing the digital divide. So that was part of the impetus for us being able to start this process and having a deeper understanding that there are certain communities that are disproportionately affected by the digital divide here in Long Beach. And then in 2018, our Technology and Innovation Commission did conduct a survey where they were able to get a deeper sense beyond the American Community Survey data that's available about which communities are most affected and understanding their true unique experiences and stories behind living behind the digital divide. And through that, as part of our 2019 effort, our councilwoman, Lena Gonzalez, who's now state senator in the state of California, also brought the digital inclusion effort to city council for us to be able to address it at a citywide standpoint. And that officially kicked off our efforts to be able to develop a strategic plan to be able to address the digital divide. So we've had certain major components that we've been focusing on, but all of those pretty much let us know that there are definitely gaps, especially for low-income communities, Black and Brown communities, and we need to be able to address that through equitable efforts.
So you talked about how federal data was one of the starting points for getting into this work. Can you talk a little bit about the impact also that state data have had on broadband availability in Long Beach?
Sure, absolutely. So the state information that we've received has also been very helpful because it gives us a larger scale viewpoint of the digital divide. So I think as any type of jurisdiction or entity is beginning to understand what community members are most affected, they need to be able to understand that more large scale macro data and then ultimately focus on localized data. And so for us, we've learned here in California that whether you live in rural parts or urban parts, we are all experiencing a digital divide. And that has been significantly heightened because of the pandemic, because everything is required to be online. Whether you need to make an appointment and speak to your healthcare provider, or you need to conduct schooling, or even being able to talk with a loved one who you haven't been able to see in over a year, everything is requiring us to be online, and we need to be able to understand that data as to why certain communities don't have equitable access to broadband. And that is something that Long Beach has championed by truly understanding that local data. And not just quantitative data that we can easily download through the census, but also data that we can get directly by speaking with community and understanding their lived experiences as well. That's something that the city of Long Beach uplifts very strongly and is also included as part of our digital inclusion roadmap, which is officially going to city council tomorrow at 5 o'clock for approval.
That's really exciting.
Thank you.
Were there any partners that were instrumental in collecting this data?
Yes, absolutely. So we believe in uplifting the work of our community-based organizations because one of the things that I learned from immediately starting my career in government is the lack of trust that government has with communities. And that is a reality, and that is due to, quite frankly, systemic institutional racism and oppression. So understanding those institutional and systemic barriers, we have to be very intentional with who we include as part of our community engagement process, and relying with trusted community-based organizations is imperative because they have the trust, the credibility, and relationships in communities. So we partnered with 4 community-based organizations to get community feedback for our roadmap. And they include cultural-based organizations. They also include organizations that do equity-based work citywide. And they were able to provide us with best practices on how we can best engage with their respective communities and do it in a way that's safe, community-friendly, equitable, and inclusive.
That's wonderful. How has the focus on community efforts and the localized data you've been able to collect informed some of the work that you've been doing on digital inclusion in Long Beach?
Yeah, so understanding the community's needs and getting that localized data helped us better shape our strategy. So for example, it's very easy for us to say, oh, we want to provide internet access and usage to low-income communities because they don't have access, but we can easily do that by providing low-cost internet services through internet service providers. That is a strategy that has been, promoted for quite some time now. But by doing this in-person community outreach where we're speaking with community members, we were able to understand that low-cost internet, even something as low as $20 a month, may be still too much for certain communities, especially those who are on fixed incomes. Some communities literally have to make a choice between putting food on the table or having to pay for internet service. And that shouldn't be something that you have to, decide between. So we have been able to look at what free resources we can provide to communities, especially during the pandemic. So we were very fortunate enough to receive CARES Act funding from the federal government and use that funding to provide free internet services and then also computers to Long Beach residents who qualified late last year through early this year.
It's great that you've been able to use CARES Act funding to help connect people and get people online. What's some of the public feedback that you've gotten on the information that you've made available and the work that you've been doing?
Yes, that's a great question. The biggest thing that we have seen from most communities, if not all, is free. Everybody wants free resources because that is what allows them to get access. And that is something that we're prioritizing even right now, since we were able to receive American Rescue Plan dollars, which in Long Beach, locally, we're calling the Long Beach Recovery Act. So we are still in a pandemic, even though, for example, here in the state of California, we're reopening officially tomorrow. We're still in a state of pandemic in terms of recovery. So how are we ensuring that community members are still getting equitable access to digital inclusion resources and services? So that is something that we're going to continue to prioritize, and by ensuring that we can uplift them with these free resources as well. So that's something that we're continuing as round two as part of our CARES Act funding efforts through the Long Beach Recovery Act. So we're just super excited to uplift the feedback that we've heard from the community. So as I mentioned, we did engage in a roadmap strategic planning process, which reaffirmed that providing free resources during this time is key. So that is something that we will continue to do as part of our engagement with community, and ultimately continuing to address any other barriers. So there are also challenges and barriers around language access because many resources and services are communicated in English, and most Long Beach residents do speak another language other than English inside of their household. So how are we being equitable by providing real-time interpretation services, translating documents, also being mindful about other challenges and barriers that people may experience. So this is something that we're going to continue to evaluate and working closely with our partners to do so.
I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next after the pandemic. Was there anything else that we didn't get the chance to cover that you wanted to share?
Sure. I would say the most important thing that I want to uplift as part of this greater conversation is racial equity, because that has been the essence of the work that we're doing. So for racial equity, we have been taking that approach. And by looking at racial equity, we want to ensure that race is no longer used to determine life outcomes. And so we have been applying an equity lens to all of the work that we're doing. So we utilize the Government Alliance on Race and Equity's framework for racial equity in an equity lens. And every time we're implementing a project, engaging with community, we go through those series of questions to ensure that our process is equitable and that we're truly uplifting communities most in need. So I just want to reiterate to anyone that is embarking on digital inclusion for the first time or has been involved in it for, maybe a year or two or a few years, make racial equity the core of your work. And that's how you'll truly have equitable impact in advancing digital inclusion and addressing digital divide.
That's a great call to action for people who want to get involved. Thank you so much for speaking with me today. And thank you to everyone who's watching.